Wow, how'd you make that?
Well, sit down and I'll tell you. My first step with most drawings is to make a small thumbnail to figure out the composition of the piece and figure out just general ideas of the picture. Sometimes I'll do like maybe 3 different types of thumbnails exploring different ideas for the picture. In this case, I only went with one because I knew exactly what I wanted. The image has been in my head for a while. After I finished the thumbnail, then I moved on to doing a really rough mock-up of what the shadow would look like on Malone and Captain Ninetails. Really rough, super loose, just blocking in where all the light sources are coming from, just so I can refer back to it later. After that, I look at a lot of reference photos. I pulled up a lot of photos from Sin City and also from various film noir movies in the past, and a lot of pictures of silly-looking goats. Once I've collected all my reference and done all my research stuff, then I move on to my giant drawing pad, which is about 14 by 17 inches. I use a light pencil, it's a 4H, and start pretty much blocking in all the stuff, constantly using my reference as a guide, and I try and keep it loose and light, try to keep some kind of energy in the pencil drawing and not focus on detailing right away. I kind of start from the big things and then work down, and eventually it gets to kind of a refined pencil image, which we will see right about now. Once I finish with all of the pencil work, then I get to go into the fun and somewhat scary part where I take my pens and ink everything. I use a whole bunch of Pigma Micron pens ranging from 0.20 millimeters all the way up to 2 millimeters. And then I also have this black pen that's just like really deep blacks, and it's great for filling in large areas. When I move on to the inking stage, I am moving a lot slower. I mean, it's this footage is sped up, but I'm moving a lot slower than I am with the pencil, just because I'm trying to make sure everything's more precise. At the same time, I'm also trying to still keep some sort of looseness and energy in what I'm drawing. So it's a bit of a balancing act. You don't want to, it's something I'm still trying to work on, but keeping your image from looking too stiff. It can kind of do that when you move into the inking stage. Yeah. You just go to it. You just ink it. Then once I'm done inking everything, I take a soft putty eraser thing and I just go nuts all over the paper with this eraser until all that's left is the ink. And then we take this and scan it. Then we get to move on to painting in Photoshop. Derp, we're in Photoshop. So the first step that I do in Photoshop is I'll take my scanned image and I'll size it up to whatever I need it to be. And then I will clean up a lot of the pen stuff that maybe I messed up on paper and fill in some of the shadows. After that, I'll then begin the process of kind of separating the entire image out into different layers. So I'm looking at this image and I've got the layer that is the background outside the car. I've got a layer that is the car itself with the seats and the roof and everything. I've got a layer that is Malone. I've got a layer that is his gun. I've got a layer that is Captain Ninetails, and I've got a layer that is his hands and the steering wheel. And the reason that I make all of those layers is that so later when I go to paint all of the details, it's a lot easier to select individual items and stay within those bounds. And it just helps. Believe me, it just helps. But it's definitely one of the most tedious parts of the whole process. It's not that fun, especially if you're drawing something that's kind of hairy, like Ninetails is. Anyway, moving on. After I block in all of the different layers, I will go in and start doing really rough shading on each layer. And I'm always looking at my reference. I'm always trying to keep in mind where the light's coming from. From the reference that I've collected, I know that usually at nighttime in cars, when people are sitting in cars, the areas next to windows are brightest and the areas in the center of the car is the darkest. So I know that's for Malone and for nine tails, that's going to be what it will look like. When I'm shading things, I like to keep it pretty rough and just try to block it in. I don't kind of like it's kind of like when I'm drawing with the pencil. I like to keep it really loose and rough and refine as I go down deeper. But sometimes I get ahead of myself and I like to just like really focus on one little area and skip a few steps. One thing I really love doing is painting eyes. There's just something about it that, I don't know, when you get a good eye and it just kind of pops, it makes the character come to life. I like kind of nailing that down, right in the beginning, I guess. And I'll always come back and tweak it and whatnot, but yeah. At this stage, I'm still doing really rough shading, but I didn't really like how everything was so smooth, so I tried using a different brush to add a little bit of texture to everything. And that we'll see that come through later, I think. I hope. I mean, I don't know. I'm kind of just making this up as I go. Then I jumped ahead here, as you can see, into making some really rough background stuff. And I knew it was going to be out of focus. We wouldn't really see much of it, so I just wanted really, cool looking shapes and like lights and, coming from headlights of cars or street lamps or signs or whatever. Just something to suggest that there's more outside. But I'm keeping it really blurry and really light, because that's not really the focus of this piece. Now with Captain Ninetails and his shading, I know that there's going to be a street lamp or something coming from his window on his left, our right, that will be illuminating him a lot. It's kind of, I guess you could call it his key light. And then there's going to be another light that's kind of in the dashboard, or like right on the steering wheel. And I see it a lot in movies and TV. Whenever they have a scene with driving at night, there's always light coming up from underneath them to illuminate the actors. So I tried to recreate that, and it's kind of like his secondary light that will be illuminating him. And then of course he's got they both have the lights from the rear window there. You can sort of see there's like two headlights coming from a car or something. That'll be playing into their rim light, is basically what it is. Now I'm just shading the gun, adding in little highlights on the edges of things, trying to keep the contrast really sharp. It's kind of how you can sort of make things look metallic, is you have the highlights really thin and they're really next to, they're really close to shadows. What I'll do is I'll take kind of going back a few steps. When I first start off with a piece, I'll take the pen drawings and I'll select all of the black in the pen, and I'll make a new layer that is just a fill-in of that selection. So basically I'm making a layer that is just the pen drawings. I'm not like multiplying a black and white image on top of something. That way I can select the lines, and then later when I'm doing things like rim lights, I can select the lines and use them as a guide to pretty much fill in the rim lights. Super easy. I don't have to go back and retrace everything that I've already done. At this point there's no rhyme or reason to what I'm working on. I'm just kind of bouncing around, and I'll work on an area for a while, and then like what I'm seeing, or I'll get bored with it or something, move on to something else. It's kind of just, you'll probably notice my attention likes to jump around every so often. Sometimes I'll jump really far ahead and try doing things that I shouldn't even be doing at that moment, and just to see if I'm on the right track or what it looks like or whatever. And I usually end up kind of undoing it and going back to where I am. I just kind of get excited, get kind of impatient. I want to see it, get finished. For most of this piece, I'm using pretty much the same brush. But every so often if I want more texture, or if I'm painting Ninetales and I need it to look, kind of hairy, there's this other brush that I'll use. I'm kind of using a bunch of different brush sets that I found online from various artists. I don't know the names of them. They're just, I don't know. They're great. I like them. Use them for most everything. For all of the pieces in this 31 Days of Haunts with Malone and this case that he's working on, I like it. I want it to be gritty and sort of, like a dark, grungy film noir. So I always like to add like a really heavy layer of noise on top of the image. And that's what you just saw there, was me applying that over everything. Now the image is getting to a point where everything is getting really close to being done, and I'm just tweaking all of the levels, adjusting shadows, highlights, and whatnot. But it's almost ready to move into color. And I looked at a lot of reference of the movie Taxi Driver, because I figured it's a night scene, they're inside of a car. What movies have a lot of those? Taxi Driver is the first thing that came to mind. So I look it up, and I liked it. I liked a lot of the colors in the stills there. And going into this piece, I knew I wanted it to be very yellow looking. From street lamps are like really yellow, and I like that. And for me, when I do a night scene, I always assume everything's blue. That's kind of, it's just the first thing you think of when you think of night. It's dark and blue and purple and whatnot. So to do a night scene with yellow colors is, it seems counterintuitive, but at the same time, it's like, well, we see this every day in real life. So it was kind of me wanting to try and do that, is push myself out of what my brain typically thinks when I do night scenes. And what's been really fun about this project is, because I'm kind of just trying to make things really vibrant and colorful and alive and cinematic and dark and whimsical and whatnot, I can kind of do whatever the hell I want with color, as long as it looks good. And it's been really fun to try and play around with that and do certain color schemes that are just like a bit wild, honestly. So as I'm painting the colors onto this, I'm taking a separate layer, and I'm switching the blending mode to color, and then I'm using, I'm painting it on top of my black and whites. I'm constantly adjusting things with hue and saturation, just trying to tweak things, make it look like it lives in the environment. I got far enough along and then realized I still needed to draw all of the etchings on Malone's gun. And I went and looked back at the drawing I had done for the countdown, and it's the other side of the gun, so I couldn't really use it, and I tried to, and nothing really lined up. So I just had to redo it. And I figured, it's the other side of the gun. It can look different from, the side we've already seen. And it also gave me an opportunity to do all this cool stuff, like draw some lady on there, a bunch of vines and leaves and a skull. And then once that's all done, then I'll just add a layer style to that layer, just giving it like a bevel and emboss and make the light, shine up from, I can't remember if I got it to shine up from the dashboard light or from the window light, but whichever one looks best, that's what I did. I've also got this plugin called Lazy Nezumi Pro, which has been kind of a lifesaver sometimes when I need to draw really smooth lines. It has the ability to kind of slow down what you're doing and give you a lot of control over your lines, almost the way like drawing in vector would, for those people out there who know what I'm talking about. And this is me getting to work on Malone, coloring him in. Something I didn't account for was the fact that he's wearing a brown coat, a brown hat. He's got, he's skin tones in a sort of yellow greenish environment with a golden gun. He's very monochromatic compared to Ninetales, and there's not a big way around that. But it's still it's following his design. It's also following the idea that I wanted. But that was an interesting kind of thing that isn't ideal, but I don't know. I think it still works. I like it. I'm keeping it, obviously. Kind of makes it look like he really blended into his environment and then just suddenly popped up out of nowhere and really caught Ninetales out by surprise. So by the end, I'm doing little things. I'm just like dodging and burning, doing little touch-ups, adjusting the colors, the highlights, and it's pretty much, and even trying out things that I probably will never use, but just seeing what it looks like. And finally, I sign my name, and there you have it. Piece is done. I hope you've enjoyed this little tutorial, and maybe I'll be making more. We'll see. I guess I should get back to work.